everyone. We're into a really exciting new session, and it's on Earth observation. You know, this is getting to be such a huge area. Every year, more and more businesses become absolutely dependent on Earth observation. So I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations. And I'd like to introduce our session chair, Dr Ben Macdonald. Ben is in charge of one of the platforms of Tern, the Landscapes platform. And I asked him then how much of this bio I need to mention, and he said I didn't have to mention any of it. But he is from CSIRO, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Beryl. So we've got a big session here. Session 6 is Earth observation and in-situ validation. So what do the satellites see, and how do we know that what we're seeing is valid? And we'll see from today's speakers a range of different talks which will look at this, as well as function. So not just stocks of what's on the ground, but function and how things change, and is what we're seeing through that modelling actually represented in the real world. So it's a big session, there's a lot of speakers. So when you ask your questions, you perhaps might want to say, you know, for Laura, this is the question, so we can direct it to them. Or if it's a general question, to say this is a general question for everyone. And with that, I'll pass over to Laura so we can get the session underway. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Let's go to my first slide, please. So my name is Laura Duncanson. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland in the US. Oh, I have to do this myself. Okay, sorry. There we go. I'd like to quickly start by, as a visitor to Australia, so I'm actually on sabbatical up at the University of Sunshine Coast, so just down the road. As a visitor to Australia, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and of all of the lands I'm going to be presenting on today, as GEO-TREES is a global and international activity. Okay, so my background is in the Lidar remote sensing of forest structure and biomass. And quick show of hands, who in here has either made or used a biomass map before? Just trying to get a sense of, okay, so like almost half. Okay, so you probably all know that there's a lot of different options for you, and you're probably contributing to these. So I come from Canada originally, but I've been on the NASA GEDI, and I sat 2 mission teams for a while making this suite of NASA biomass maps. But we're not the only people making those maps, as you all know. So there are other space agencies like ESA putting out biomass maps, NGOs, increasingly the private sector, and everyone's making these maps for different purposes, but it's confusing users. So now that there's dozens of potential options, they don't know which one to use. Sometimes they just go with the easiest one to access, which isn't necessarily the most accurate, and we want these to be accurate products. These are being used for natural climate solutions, for carbon markets, for national reporting on greenhouse gas emissions. So we really want to get these numbers right and the right product into the right hands to have the highest impact. Okay, as you all probably also know, biomass maps are not just from satellites, right? We always need a ground component to translate our Earth observation data into estimates of forest carbon and biomass. So we need those boots on the ground. We need all of that tree hugging all around the world. But as all the Tern folk know, this is expensive and very time consuming. So we don't have what we need to do this properly, and we haven't. And that's where GEO-TREES comes in. So GEO-TREES is essentially a concept that is becoming a reality now of a global reference data set for biomass cal-val. What we need for this are 3 flavors of data, so terrestrial laser scanning data, TLS, airborne, Lidar, and the traditional field plot boots on the ground data. So all of those data sets, we need them in all of these sites. So these are conceptual sites. These are not the actual GEO-TREES sites, but these are from a paper before GEO-TREES became a thing, where we said, okay, if we had these sites covering all of the gradients in the world, that's what we need. And so we went to the space agencies and we said, this is what we need. And they said, that's way too expensive. And so the space agencies and various other CEOS members are contributing in bits and pieces to this, but we really didn't have the funding we needed to pull this off at scale. And so then we went to the private sector, and the Bezos Earth Fund committed 12 million to start 30 sites across the tropics, and then the Moore Foundation matched that, so then we're up to 24 million. So we're starting to get really significant investment in this concept, and it's becoming a reality. So I'm going to talk to you about the sort of status and where Tern fits in as a very important partner to GEO-TREES. If you want details on the recommendations, this is all following a protocol we wrote that was endorsed by CEOS back in 2021. If you don't know what CEOS is, I kind of think of it as like the UN of remote sensing. And so it's a very long and pretty dry document saying this is how to collect the data, this is how to do uncertainties in your maps, etc. But one of the main recommendations was for GEO-TREES. Now, GEO-TREES is not just a static recommendation system of, okay, we measure all these sites and we're done. It needs to be living because we need it to match all of the different satellites now and into the future. So we have all of this wonderful new technology in space from NASA, from ESA, from JAXA, from various other CEOS agencies now and into the future. So as we have a time series of biomass maps from a time series of satellites, we need a time series of the reference data. So the recommendation for GEO-TREES is to update those data sets every 5 years, more or less. Okay. John Armston is going to be talking about some of the exciting futures of satellite LiDAR from NASA. Hopefully there will be something that's like a follow-on to GEDI that he's the vegetation lead on. But yes, so GEO-TREES needs to be maintained into the future as well. Zooming into Australia. So here we have the GEO-TREES site list on the left and the Australian sites on the right. And so there are 5 Tern sites that Ben Sparrow and Beryl can talk about more, but these are the sites that we're hoping to integrate into the global GEO-TREES initiative, and hopefully then those will be kept up to date. Maybe we can find even more sites, but this is a really exciting start. Okay. So, as I said, there are 3, so we're gonna start talking about like, how do we actually make this work in terms of coordination and the airborne LiDAR component in particular. As I said, there are these 3 flavors of data, right? The TLS, the ground plots, and the airborne LiDAR. I'm primarily involved at the airborne LiDAR stage, but also kind of linking to the ground plots. The GEO-TREES Global Initiative has hired 3 postdocs, 1 to lead each of these components. So I work the most closely with Sam Grubinger, who's in my group at Maryland, on the ALS team. And for each of these flavors of data, there is what we call a technical implementation group, or a TIG. So the Airborne LiDAR TIG is co-led by myself and Tommaso Hooker at the University of Bristol. And then this is Sam, who might be getting in touch with anyone who wants to work with this from Tern. But here are all of the other people who are members of our TIG. And these are sort of international experts on LiDAR. And so we're trying to co-design and come up with consensus when we're collecting and processing these LiDAR data sets. So I'll give you a couple of little examples of the types of things we're working on. So we're essentially taking the airborne LiDAR, combining it with the ground plot data, and creating reference maps that then we will link to the EO data. So this is one example workflow that we created for a site in Panama, but essentially taking the raw LiDAR data and processing it all the way through to a biomass map. So feel free to look at that. All of this processing is supposed to be open science. So we're using a cloud-based compute platform that was co-designed between NASA and ESA that all of like the code and all of the data will become open and free as part of this process. So the notebooks that you'll see if you scan that are open science notebooks that will be available, and we kind of are peer reviewing them as we go. Here's another example, especially for those of you who haven't done a lot of LiDAR research, and a lot of the GEO-TREES site PIs are not LiDAR people, they're field plot people. So we're creating notebooks to help them get familiar with airborne LiDAR as well. So this is kind of fun. You can scan this and zoom into a part of Barrow, Colorado Island in Panama and actually start scanning around cloud-optimized point clouds, which is kind of fun. So you can play around kind of intuitively with the LiDAR. Hopefully we can create these examples for the Tern data sets as well. But there you can start to see them in 3D, and that's why we love LiDAR. It looks really fun. Okay, moving on into something maybe a little less splashy, but like how are we coordinating? So the idea is we're not just having one postdoc in the world try and process all of the GEO-TREES data that's flowing in. That's unsustainable. Yeah, so we're hoping this will be a big group of people processing the data and then merging their data, merging their code together, having an internal peer review, making sure that we're all okay with the way we're processing the data. Different forests will have slightly different algorithms. So multiple people are going to be developing workflows. We're going to test those workflows and peer review them through a Git repo. And then we're going to go to work and process the world's data, yeah? The part that I think is the most important is actually at the end of this. So once we have these suites of reference data from GEO-TREES, which will be airborne LiDAR biomass maps and height maps, we are going to validate our EO products, right? Like that's the original goal. So we have to build a tool that essentially will be so easy that a user will say, hey, I'm in the Philippines, I want to know which of these 10 biomass maps to use, and we'll say, we can give you a tool where you can run a notebook and it'll say, hey, these 2 biomass maps are great here, the other one's probably not very good for the Philippines. That's what we want to do eventually with the GEO-TREES data. We're a few years away from that. Okay, here's kind of where we're at. So as of last week, this is the status of the international GEO-TREES funds are collecting all of these sites. So it's primarily in the bigger data gaps, which are the tropical moist forests. These are places that have been under-resourced for cal-val forever. And so these are where there are planes all over the place collecting data sets in these sites. Okay, and so we're just starting to process some of that, and we're very open to having people get involved. If we look at these sites, on a classic Whittaker diagram, you do see that these are the warmer parts of the world, and we do have a gradient of precipitation there, but we really need to fill in this part, networks such as Tern to fill in Australia, networks such as NEON to fill in the US, so there are other collaborations and other support that we're getting outside of the kind of tropical focus of the core GEO-TREES funding. Okay, so with that, quickly I'll summarize. So GEO-TREES, the LiDAR team, we're very busy. We're still getting a little bit coordinated. We want to make sure that all of this is done as a community consensus. So it takes a lot longer, but it's worth the wait, we found, to do things slowly and making sure everybody's on board with it. It is all going to be open, both the data and the tools, which means that if you are interested in participating, you are more than welcome to do so, especially if you want to try to do some of the processing of the Tern data in collaboration with us or independently. Tern really is a key GEO-TREES partner, so it's really exciting that I get to come to this meeting and interact with all of you. And we're kind of early days on this, so I would love to co-develop that validation tool for Australia with the Australian Tern GEO-TREES data. Okay, and with that, I will thank all of the space agencies who contribute to biomass mapping, all of the groups that contribute to the future biomass missions, and of course to GEO-TREES. It's been a long and lengthy effort, but I'll end it there. Thank you for your time.
So, good morning, everyone. I am Krish Singh, and I'm honored to present here today my master's research project that I've done at Western Sydney University. And a part of my, that is the back button. The big one. Thank you. Okay. So part of my research involved detecting and validating vegetation cover trends in Australia through an integration of remotely sensed and in-situ data. So what is vegetation cover? Vegetation cover is the proportion of area land surface that is covered by vegetation. It is a key defining property of terrestrial ecosystems, and it influences critical processes such as the carbon, other nutrient, and the water cycle. And vegetation cover responds to shifts in climate variability and changes in the climates, which makes it an important indicator of environmental change. So fractional cover is a way of breaking down vegetation cover into distinct components representing key ecological states. So PV, or photosynthetic vegetation, is a fraction of the area that is covered by green, productive, photosynthetically active vegetation. And understanding PV over time can tell us about productivity and phenological patterns. And NPV, or non-photosynthetic vegetation, refers to the dormant or senescent vegetation, or even woody components. And this fraction can tell us about decomposition rates, fuel loads, and sometimes a bit about carbon sequestration. And the final fraction, bare soil, is essentially just the exposed ground, and it can tell us about soil erosion susceptibility. And monitoring these fractions over time, their dynamics, can tell us about these key ecological processes and their responses to climate events and land management regimes. So long-term satellite records dating back to the 1980s has indicated a widespread greening trend in Australia and even majority of the world. The majority of this trend is thought to be due to the carbon fertilization effect, stimulating plant growth, increasing photosynthetic rates, and water use efficiency. But it's often unclear how these changes are reflected on the ground. What kinds of vegetation types are actually being affected? Are the grasses, shrubs, or trees being affected or contributing to this greening? So understanding this distinction will help us interpret ecological change and inform land management decisions. So the field data we used, it's from AusPlots, which is Tern Ecosystem Surveillance Network of Australia. I think they established over 980 sites. Might be a bit of typo there. Around the world, around Australia, sorry. And the sampling protocol includes establishing 1 hectare plots with 1,010 point intercepts, where for each intercept, any occurring plant cover are identified at a species level, which allows for robust remeasurements of fractional cover and species abundances. And about 40% of these sites has been revisited, allowing us to estimate fractional cover change at these sites. So we acquired field data from 735 sites, as you can see on the map in the middle. And at each of these sites, we classify them by the dominant vegetation type. So grasses, shrubs, and trees, based on the prominent growth from there using a species abundance data. And from these sites, we kind of extracted the long-term time series of fractional cover data, extending from 1987 to 2022. So the product we use is from Digital Earth Australia, which uses the Landsat image collection, so 30 meters, 16-day resolution. And they estimate fractional cover by applying a spectral unmixing algorithm on Landsat pixels, which essentially just decomposes them into these 3 fractional cover types. And they calibrated on sites that extends nationally, that ensures good accuracy. So with this product and AusPlots field data, we'll be able to compare these data sources on a one-to-one basis and provide a clearer picture of vegetation change than what is possible in either one of these data sources alone. So for this talk, we are essentially just interested in detecting greening trends in Australia, how it differs among vegetation types, and the relationship between remotely sensed and in-situ data that we collected. So we found widespread greening trends. So we extracted PV trend from each of these sites using a robust linear method called theosense. And by taking the significance, we found that, yes, majority of Australia is greening, mainly on the northern and eastern area, and perhaps some browning on the western area. And among these vegetation types, we found that the grass types contributed most to the greening, but it's pretty much greening on every vegetation types. And then we wanted to compare the correspondence between each data sources. And there's a lot of variability, but there tend to be good correspondence with R-squares a bit less than 0.7. But NPV actually had a very weak correspondence. And among the vegetation types, we found that the grasses tend to contribute most to the error here, which are known to be highly variable and have rapid greening responses, versus the more stable vegetation types, which had R-squares even extending above 0.7. And then we wanted to check whether the change in vector cover types measured between site visits correspond between these two data sources. So the black line is the change in vegetation that we get from on the ground, and the blue line here is the change in vector cover from the remotely sensed data. And we find that this correspondence generally go in the right direction, but with some variability. Okay, I have to wrap this up quickly. So in conclusion, there might be some discrepancies between how NPV and PV are distinguished on site and by the satellite. I think if we can find more ways to investigate this, we can improve our correspondences and have a clearer understanding of vegetation change. And if you want to see the image sources of each of these sites taken by Tern, thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to give this presentation about the recent research from our team in Sparrow as a part of the Tern Landscape Earth Observation Program. So, title is using the subdiurnal surface air temperature difference anomaly or sector from the Himawari 8 geostationary satellite for the early detection of vegetation drought stress. And we had the application to the region Australia's 2017 to 19 tinderbox drought. So I'm going to start by just showing this cartoon to briefly explain the biophysical link between the land surface temperature, or TS, and the vegetation drought stress. So when the water deficit occurs, the plants will get stressed, and they close their stomata to reduce the water loss. This will decrease the evapotranspiration, and the less evaporative cooling will increase the surface temperature. This will lead to a higher temperature gradient between the land surface and the atmosphere, that drive a stronger sensible heat flux, or edge. Therefore, the variations in the land surface temperature, TS, or the surface air temperature gradient, or TS minus TA, can provide a physical process-based indicator of the underlying vegetation drought stress. An unique feature of land surface temperature is the potential for the early detection of vegetation stress. So as mentioned in the previous slide, surface temperature relates to the plant's stomata closure and transpiration. This kind of the physiological response occurs almost instantaneously after drought condition established. So it provides a very good early signals for the later visible decline in the vegetation greenness that happens more gradually. However, in the literature, there's only limited studies that use surface temperature to predict the crop yield, but that means they only focus on the agricultural regions. So we still have two questions to further explore. Firstly, how does the performance of such TS-based indices vary by different land covers and climate? And secondly, compared to the more traditional metrics of water availability like precipitation and soil moisture, do the TS-based indices actually provide any extra value in forecasting the vegetation decline in drought? So with that, we have the following three objectives. Firstly, we will try to use the geostationary satellite surface temperature and the subdiurnal air temperature grid to develop a parsimonious surface air temperature difference anomaly or sector to detect the vegetation drought stress. Secondly, we will assess the utility of sector to monitor the spatial temporal patterns of the recent tinderbox drought from 2017 to 19 in Australia. And finally, we will try to quantify the skill of sector in forecasting such visible drought-induced vegetation decline in diverse climate and land covers, and also benchmark their performance against the traditional water availability-based indices and the existing satellite TS indices in the literature. So in this research, we explore the land surface temperature product from the Himawari 8 satellite. It is a satellite that covers Australia and has a high temporal resolution at 10 minutes. We also use the Sparrow hourly air temperature grid for all Australia region, which achieves the better accuracy and spatial resolution than the climate reanalysis data. Our study region is the Southeast Australia region. From 2017 to 19, it experienced 3 years of very hot and dry conditions, and this extreme drought set up the unprecedented black summer forest fires, which is why it called the tinderbox drought, because it leads to the fire. But after the fire, it recovers by 3 years of very cool and wet conditions in the La Nina event. So this provides a very interesting case studies to understand the drought indices like sector. So now I'll start diving into the first objective, which is to develop the sector metric. So the graph here shows the diurnal time series of the hourly land surface temperature in pink and the air temperature in black for the same day of the year and one location. So from left to right, you can see that the difference between the land surface and air temperature show a clear, consistent increasing trend from the wet year to the dry year, especially around the shaded midday period. And when we plot the diurnal time series of Ts minus Ta in the rightmost figure, we can see the much better distinction for the dry year compared to the average and the wet year. So this proof of concept example provides a good motivation that we can use the temporal anomalies of the Ts minus Ta around that midday period to quantify the drought stress signals. And that essentially leads to our sector metric. We develop sector by 4 key steps. So firstly, we use the total difference between the hourly land surface and air temperature in the period from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. to compute the cumulative subdiurnal integral. This midday period covers when the plant stress is likely more prominent, or the so-called the midday depression in the plant physiology. For the second step, we get the entire time series of this Ts minus Ta integral for each pixel, and then produce the temporal composite by the moving average, which is the thicker red line here. This composite step essentially helps to reduce the data gap and noise due to the cloud cover. Also, you can see that the time series has a very clear seasonal cycle. So the next step is to compute the monthly seasonal climatology on the lower panel. And this climatology helps to account for the seasonal cycle of the solar radiation. So we can better tease out the impact of the moisture deficit and the vegetation stress. And finally, we compute the sector metric by calculating the standardized anomalies of such Ts minus Ta integral with respect to this climatology. By having this standardized z-score, we can resolve the spatial variability in the temperature magnitude and allow the direct comparison of the pixel values. So I'm now going to talk about a second objective, which is to apply sector to monitor the tinderbox drought. So the map here shows the monthly average sector value for the Southeast Australia region. From top to bottom, you can see a very distinct interannual pattern. So sector shows a progressive intensification from 2016 to 2019, and the values become the most extreme towards late 2019 in the Black Summer fire season, which is the red box here. However, after the fires, the sector values gradually recovers or reduce in the 3 nonlinear wet year, which is indicated by the blue colors. We then look at sector at the shorter weekly timescales. From left to right, you can see that sector captured the very rapid drought intensification within only 2 months, from near normal in early July to extreme values above 1.6 in the early September. This indicates the occurrence of the short-term rapid fresh drought event in the background of the long-term drought. The precipitation and soil moisture anomalies shows a very consistent spatial temporal pattern, but sector detects more evident transition in the drought conditions and shows much better spatial details. So finally, we will go to the final objectives and evaluate the scale of sector in the early vegetation stress detection. So having the accurate forecast for the vegetation greenness decline can provide a quantitative evidence for effective early detection of vegetation stress. So here we define such a metric of the greenness forecast scale by the temporal forecast correlation with the NDVI anomalies. So as you can see in the schematic on the right, we match sector to the NDVI anomalies at a future time step and then compute their temporal correlation. We benchmark the greenness forecast scale of sector against the traditional precipitation and root zone and soil moisture metric. And we also benchmark against 2 existing indices in the literature that only use land surface temperature, so TCI and TRI. They represent the anomalies of the surface temperature magnitude and the morning rise rate, respectively. So the map here shows a spatial distribution of such greenness forecast scale for different variables. The top row shows the forecast correlation metric, and the bottom row shows the difference between sector and other benchmark. Sector shows the best vegetation greenness forecast scale in this central semi-arid region, which is marked by the yellow dashed polygon, with a forecast correlation of above 0.6 at 4-week lead time. In particular, this is also the area where sector shows the greatest improvement over the different precipitation and soil moisture metric. Also, compared to the 2 TS-only indices, so TCI and TRI, sector shows the overall better greenness forecast scale. This demonstrates the actual value of the air temperature information in sector to more accurately detect the increased sensible heating and the underlying vegetation water stress. We then look at the vegetation greenness forecast scale in different land covers, and we found a very interesting land cover gradient that we show by these 3 traffic light colors. So the top row is the low vegetation cover region where sector shows a relatively weak greenness forecast scale. The middle row is the herbaceous ecosystem, so cropland and grassland. Sector shows a much stronger NDVI forecast performance, but the performance is relatively similar to other indices. However, when we look at the bottom row, which is the woody vegetation, like woodland and forest, sector shows the most evident advantage over all the variables, and this advantage can maintain for up to 40 days of the lead time. So finally, we take a deeper look into the climate and land cover factors that influence the advantage of sector in forecasting the vegetation greenness decline. So the heat map here shows the median difference in the NDVI forecast correlation between sector and 3 months precipitation for each combination of the climate wetness in x-axis and fractional green cover on the y-axis. Sector shows the best advantage over precipitation in the semi-arid region with moderate to high green cover, which is the orange region here, which mainly match the semi-arid woodland and open forest. So why is that the case? Well, the woody vegetation has a more complex physiological response to droughts, like the tighter stomatal regulation and grasses, and the deeper root for water access. The precip and soil moisture only track the change in water availability, but sector can link to plant transpiration that is determined not just by water availability, but also the plant physiology. So consequently, this extra information of sector on the plant physiology becomes more important in diagnosing the actual level of the drought stress for woody vegetation that has such stronger and more complex physiological response to drought. So in conclusion, the difference between subdiurnal land surface and air temperature can provide the parsimonious and process-based method to detect vegetation drought stress. SETDA effectively capture the broader multi-year evolution and the short-term fresh drought event. It also effectively forecasts the drought-induced visible vegetation greenness decline in the semi-arid climate with the most advantage in the woody vegetation ecosystem. Finally, with this parsimonious framework, it can be extended to other geostationary satellites around the world to advance the global scale assessment and early warning of the vegetation drought stress. If you are interested in further details of the work, please check the RIC publication and the Zenodo repository. I'll leave it here. Thanks for listening. Happy to take any questions and comments. Thank you.
The big one, right? Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Adriana Parra, and I am presenting on behalf of my co-authors some preliminary results from our research on mapping ecosystem extent in the Great Western Woodlands. For some context, this research project is part of an effort led by the Committee on Air Observation Satellites through the Ecosystem Extent Task Team. This initiative aims to support government agencies in producing the indicators required by the Global Biodiversity Framework. And to do that, the task team is evaluating ways of facilitating the use of Earth observation data for producing those biodiversity indicators with an initial focus on ecosystem extent. So within that framework, our CSIRO group, that is part of the task team, selected the Great Western Woodlands as a demonstrator site to showcase how air observation data can be used for tracking ecosystem extent. And the reasons for selecting this area are its ecological importance as the largest temperate woodland ecosystem in the world, and also because this region is part of a Tern supersite, so there is ongoing research and field data acquisition, which is very important for our study. Since this area is so large, for this initial part of the project, we focus on a smaller area of interest around the Lake Johnston area, which you can see here in the figure. So our project has two sets of objectives. On the one hand, as part of the CEO study, we are focusing on potential end users and analysis reproducibility. And our goal is to produce a scalable workflow for map production using multi-sensor air observation data. On the other hand, we are building on the research goals of the Tern supersite by producing baseline maps of ecosystem extent for the whole region. So as part of this scalable workflow, we have produced some exploratory analysis to evaluate the importance of different input data and different machine learning methods on map accuracy. To do this test, we first created a training and validation data set using the National Vegetation Information System as the classification scheme. And then we use photo interpretation to identify the major vegetation subgroups in the Lake Johnston area. Additionally, for this test, we focus on the year 2021, and so we use annual medium composites of Landsat 8, Sentinel-2, and Sentinel-1 as our input data. This initial classification test resulted in the best performance for a random forest model using both optical and synthetic aperture radar. This model achieved an overall accuracy of 91%, which was very good results, yay. But then we noticed that for all the evaluated models, differences in growth stages within an ecosystem resulted in misclassification. So on the figure here, on the left, you can see an area with a fire scar from 2019. And you can see that the 2021 classification results in some errors. So instead of eucalyptus woodland, the model is labeling the fire scar as bare soil or other shrublands. And so these results made us think, okay, how do we deal with disturbance? And then how do we map all these different ecosystem expressions that are all part of the same ecosystem class, but they look so different between each other? So to try to address this issue, we developed a deep learning UNet model for detecting fire scars. And so this model tracks a fire scar until there is some level of recovery in the vegetation, as you can see on the figure on the left. Using the predictions from the UNet model, we then constructed a composite image with the annual data from 2016 to 2021. And so for this composite, each pixel was selected from either a pre-fire dataset or from the dataset with the longest time since fire. So basically what we were trying to do here was kind of like biasing our input data towards a more mature representation of the ecosystem classes. With this pre-fire composite, we produced a new classification model which shows some improvements over recently burned areas. So in this figure, you see two examples of areas with fire scars, and then you can see the comparison between the 2021 map and the pre-fire map next to it. And you can see that fire scars that were previously classified as bare soil or heathland or other shrublands in the 2021 map are now being identified as eucalyptus woodland in the pre-fire composite. So again, yay, good results, but misclassification is still an issue. So if you notice, in the pre-fire map, the eucalyptus woodland classes identified by the model are not the same as the labels in the NBIS map. And so the model is still not able of differentiating classes that have similarities. So for this reason, and as part of our next steps to expand this mapping workflow to the whole Great Western Woodlands area, we are working on integrating the available Tern field data into our methods so that we can produce an improved training and validation data set. So we are currently in the process of gathering all the available data, and so far we have found information from plot, transects, UAB, and Airborne Lidar, and TLS. So the first challenge that we need to tackle is to figure out how we're going to integrate all the different spatial resolutions of these data sets. And we also need to evaluate if there have been changes in land cover in these areas since they were acquired. So you can see an example here of a plot that is no longer there because the land cover changed. So to conclude, these initial results show the benefits of analysis-ready data and cloud computing resources for streamlining the implementation of classification workflows. And we believe that these resources will help to facilitate the use of Earth observation data for producing the biodiversity indicators. As for our second set of objectives, we believe that the proposed approach of using fire detection to improve the classification methods has shown some very good results, but that misclassification is still an issue, so integrating the field data will be essential to improve our model. So to wrap up, I would like to acknowledge the different agencies that produce and distribute the data that we use. And we also like to thank Dr. Suzanne Prover and Dr. Alison O'Donnell for sharing their insight on the Great Western Woodlands. And we thank Matt Pajek and Dr. Phobios Giacogiannis for their help with the map workflow setup and with developing the deep learning model. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I'm talking today about dynamic vegetation height products for Australia. And coming back to what Laura spoke about earlier, this is a step back from biomass, just looking at height itself. Similar to biomass, there's lots of different height products available. We're interested in height because it's so important for carbon storage, biodiversity, habitat condition, and bushfire fuel loads. Continental to global scale height products are becoming increasingly available, but they are often not systematically updated. They often lack associated uncertainty layers, and the cal-val locations that have been used to validate the models are seldom published together with them. Within CSIRO and the national bushfire intelligence capability. There have been recent efforts at improving national scale height modeling from 2019 to 2024, looking at top of canopy height at 30-meter resolution. And this is the work my colleague, who's author on this talk, Catherine Ticehurst, has been leading, and using the available GEDI data to date in conjunction with annual Landsat products and ALOS to develop national scale height maps for Australia. And these have proved to be quite effective. Validation data to date has been based on the AusPlot network of field data and a few spots of airborne Lidar. But obviously, this is quite limited cal-val data. If you caught JC's talk yesterday on the Dronescape project, I think that's a fantastic resource for how we can really expand the cal-val of height data across the continent. But just for a quick comparison here, you can see that the product developed to date shows a lot more detail in Australia's drylands than what the current global products predict. So particularly in our dryland systems where vegetation height is less than 2 or 3 meters, it's really hard to detect using current models. And part of that is because of the GEDI sensitivity to short-statured vegetation, although John, who's speaking next, might touch on some of that. So we have a project now under Tern to try and improve the robustness of our national scale height products and to see how well we can do going back in time. And this project will focus on improving that through a number of avenues. One is increased GEDI availability, now that we have GEDI coming in post-hibernation again. Increased synthetic aperture radar. Very exciting that Biomass launched and is delivering its first images last week. That's the P-band mission from ESA. And hopefully very soon, NISAR, the JPL and ISRO mission, L-band mission will be contributing to this. Other things we're aiming to tackle: multi-sensor fusion and the separation of Earth observation and ancillary data inputs. So we really want to try and separate in a lot of the height models. They often incorporate terrain attributes, soil, rainfall, for example, but we really want to try and separate out what we can get just from the remote sensing itself without the ancillary data sets. Because if we want to explore how variables change along gradients in precipitation, for example, we don't want to have used precipitation in modeling the height in the first place. And then the last component, which is really where I fit into the project, is the targeted collection of high-quality cal-val data sets. And we're talking here about high quality in terms of state and dynamics. So we don't just want to calibrate and validate the height itself, but we also want to be able to calibrate and validate the changes in height over time. To that end, CSIROs have invested in 3 ACE Core NOAA drone systems. So this is a very large platform drone, and we have 2 Regal VUX 120 sensors. So this is a high accuracy survey grade system with a very good IMU as well. And we've been pretty active over the last few years, mostly through CSIRO strategic projects at a number of sites, including Robson Creek over here. And the nice thing about this system is it enables us to capture in half an hour. So it's a large platform, very stable platform. In half an hour, we can fly a square kilometer with 1,000 points per square meter. Very high quality data, which we can segment to the individual tree and reconstruct at the individual tree level. So the data quality is akin to that we get from terrestrial Lidar. Over the last few years, we've collected data at all these sites on the left-hand side, And now with the new Tern funding, we're adding to that with the sites on the right-hand side, and also hoping to expand more beyond the supersite network to the surveillance plots, and through collaboration with Dronescape, really explore how these different LiDAR systems can complement each other. So just an example of data collection. So going to Litchfield, which is where I've spent a lot of time. We have a canopy height model. So the lighter colors are taller trees. That's the Airborne Lidar in 2013 in the top panel. That's the Tern Lidar from 2013. And our UAV Lidar from 2023 in the bottom. And you can see that there's been some changes happening over the 10 years. But what's really exciting, if we come through and look at the population structure, you can see that in 2013 we have this cohort here at about 7 meters, and we can see how that's grown and moved up in 2023. And that's really the magic of Tern, and that we can come back to these data sets. They don't become less valuable through time, they become more valuable through time. But equally fascinating as we move to other sections, other 100-hectare blocks within Litchfield, we see we have patches where nothing has changed, and all those changes are different. And in that case, I don't think nothing has changed. I think it's a case of similar changes occurred, but a fire has come through and knocked it back to the same state again. So ideally, 10 years in between is too long. We need more regular data collections at these sites. And just to wrap up, just to show the difference in old Airborne Lidar and new UAV Lidar, here in the cross-section, you can just see the really high density of data that we've been collecting. And that enables us to map in 3 dimensions through time how these ecosystems are changing. So it becomes more than just cal-val for Earth observation. It really gets to understanding population and ecological dynamics. And thank you very much.
All right, hi everyone. I'm here to talk today about NASA's Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation and our work in Australia. So first I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, Ralph, the GEDI principal investigator, also Laura is here today, and also colleagues in Australia that we've been working with in the last year on enhanced calibration and validation activities at one of the sites in Australia. That's a nice model tree that we scanned. I'll show that again at the end of the presentation. So GEDI's a NASA Earth Ventures instrument. It's the first satellite LiDAR that was specifically designed for the measurement of vegetation structure. It's a sampling mission. That's designed to provide unique vegetation structure and biomass data for input to carbon cycle and biodiversity research. On the left here, you can see the sampling pattern of GEDI. It has 8 ground tracks, each and 4 power, 4 coverage, 600 meters apart, 60 meter spacing along track. Over the course of the mission, these have accumulated over time to provide sort of pretty dense coverage over the Earth. And that's the result of about 3 years of data there. But we produce these biophysical products as well. So as well as height and ground elevation, we also produce these profiles of foliage density that you can see in this example here. And we're at a stage now where we've collected enough data that we really want to, we're going into new releases of products, and we're going to enhance calibration and validation of these products, and I'll talk about that, a bit about that today. We did have Shaun mentioned it, we've been operating continuously since 2019, but we did have a hibernation during our extended mission because a defense mission took our slot on the International Space Station, but we've resumed operations now, and all the lasers are performing as well as they ever have. We expect to, we have our next senior review in 2026, so we have funding to operate till then, and so following that review, we're hoping we'll continue operation to 2030. These are examples of the near global gridded products that GEDI has produced ground elevation, canopy cover, and vertical profile metrics derived from the vertical distribution of canopy cover and canopy height. And so it's these measurements that I've seen been used in a number of presentations the past 2 days, particularly combining with other remote sensing data sets for mapping canopy height and biomass. Airborne Lidar is key for tracking the performance of GEDI, both calibration of products and also validation of these products that I've just shown. So there's a lot of sites that have been contributed by the community globally, including the Tern sites in Australia, that we've been pointing GEDI to, regularly acquiring and co-locating. So Airborne Lidar is really important because it allows us to separate errors due to geolocation, due to errors due to the measurement process from Lidar. I've also pointed out one of the Australian sites, the in-June Landscape Collaborative Project, which we've done a lot of work at recently, including with Shaun, and I'll talk about that a bit more in the talk. So with all it's summarising a lot of work here, but our internal calibration and validation is sort of showing about 3 metres of error globally, and that's there's been a lot of independent studies now, and which overall, on average, are corresponding to what we've done within the mission. On the bottom right is something I extracted out just for Australia. It shows really good performance, but it also highlights some issues. It's showing good performance where we could co-locate the data, where we could remove the geolocation error. And so there's many sites, like particularly Great Western Woodlands, Calparam, where we really struggle to do that, and because you need sort of complex vegetation structure to do that co-location. And so, more advanced cal-val activities in these short stature, low cover environments is very important. But also a lot of the Tern sites, it's really great they're being updated through GEO-TREES and other activities like Shaun just showed, because a lot of those sites that we've been using are getting very outdated. I think most of the Tern sites captured Airborne Lidar 2012 and 2015. So we have these structure measurements of height and cover and vertical profiles, so then we need to go to biomass. And also, it's a modelling process. And so we also use, in many of those Airborne Lidar locations that I've shown, there's also field plots of biomass that we've spent a lot of time standardising and going through a QA/QC process to link those with the Airborne Lidar. We simulate GEDI waveforms from Airborne Lidar. We develop relationships between GEDI metrics and these field plots of biomass globally. We apply those models on orbit to the GEDI footprints. And then we can calculate mean biomass and uncertainty at the 1 kilometre scale. And that's one of the main mission products, and it's how we track performance to the mission science objectives. And those estimators account for sampling uncertainty because GEDI is not a complete sample. It only gets, it's a partial sample of an area, but it also accounts for the model error that comes from those relationships between the vegetation structure and the above ground biomass. And then we account for a number of other dependencies to scale up those estimates to the scale of jurisdictions, subnational and national, to produce mean biomass and uncertainty for larger areas. And that's been one of the key achievements by GEDI globally, is that we've been able to provide estimates in a consistent way across many different countries and increase the precision of estimates in countries that don't have NFI networks, or we can go to high resolution as well. So this is the standard GEDI above ground biomass product you can see on the left. It's a sort of a snapshot product using all data across the mission. On the top left is the mean, and the bottom left is the standard error of the mean. The map on the top right, you can see all the training data that went into that. There's a lot of data in Australia that's still yet to make it, but there's a lot more going into release 3, which will be coming out later this year. But yeah, a big recent focus has been this database that we use to calibrate the products is living. So throughout in the future, we wish to incorporate more data, and we want to work with Tern to achieve that. Biomass is not the only vegetation property we model. We also are modelling, got a new product called Forest Structural Complexity that we've recently released and published, led by PhD student Tiago de Conto. Again, the Tern data were quite crucial in developing as training data for that, as you can see in the lower right. But that's now a product that's been available, I think, since earlier this year, but also we're now creating continuous maps by fusing these estimates with SAR and optical imaging, which I'll talk about in the next slide, I think. So the GEDI extended mission, we met our baseline mission, we met our science objectives, and so now we're in an extended mission and we're trying to build another additional science products that are useful to the community. And so to cover the big part of the world that isn't sampled by GEDI, we're fusing with ISAT-2. We've also been looking at waveform imputation. We've got a new product that basically we use the Landsat archive. So for every single Landsat pixel, we assign a waveform. And so anything we can derive from a waveform, we can assign to that pixel. And here's an example for canopy height that you can see here. A nice property of the imputation approach seems to be that we characterize the full distribution of vegetation and not saturating like a lot of the other height products. But there's other limitations. But I think that's led by Shaun Healy, and I think it's ready to go into the community and get some feedback. But again, we're also producing continuous products based on machine learning as well, and we're going to be gap-filling our biomass product, and we're now starting to look at change products as well. So I'm sort of pivoting a bit, but not really. It's just one site that we've worked on recently because we've been prototyping new products to fuse GEDI with imaging SAR, for tracking change, but two, producing high-resolution estimates of above-ground biomass. And a key site that we've been focused on is the Indian Landscape Collaborative Project in central Queensland. It doesn't have a flux tower, but I think it's called a Tern affiliate site. But it's got a long history now, nearly a quarter of a century. So it was originally flown, a big exercise in the year 2000. It's about a 60 by 40 kilometre area with 150 primary sampling units, and within those you have 50 by 50 metre secondary sampling units. And a number of those are then sampled with field data and more recently TLS data. And so it was originally acquired through the NASA JPL PACRIM mission and an ARC grant to University of New South Wales. But then it was followed up in 2009 for validation of some of the Queensland government products that we were developing in collaboration with the University of Aberystwyth, where Richard Lucas is. Richard Lucas has been sort of started this whole thing and has been a real leader in this at this site. But more in 2015, we acquired it again through the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program to support the development of vegetation structure. And then most recently last year, we reacquired the site for NASA Carbon Monitoring System project and for enhanced GEDI calibration and validation. The data from 2015 is available through Tern. We're going to make the data from 2024 available through Tern as well. We really need to sort of spend some time collecting all the historical data too and trying to organise it and make it available. That's something Stuart Finn has raised in the past as well. But this is the 2024 acquisition that we acquired. You can see in blue you have the Airborne Lidar flight paths. Gotcha. The orange is the ones that we have along GEDI tracks. But I'll just skip and focus on, you can see the history of change here. You can see all the growth in the poplar boxes. You've got dieback in angophores and other large trees. We acquired terrestrial laser scanning and UAV laser scanning and producing products and automated workflows from that. And we've been updating biomass models from GEDI with the data therein. We're also preparing for NISAR, and in June is one of those sites that's going into cal-val of that. And NISAR is scheduled to launch at the end of this month. So, and we've been producing prototype biomass there. So just finally to summarize up, GEDI is entering a new observational epoch together with multi-frequency SAR. We're moving from baseline products to tracking change. The contemporaneous in-situ and airborne acquisitions that are happening through GEO-TREES is important, and updating those sites, because these repeat measurements are really important for tracking the dynamics, like Shaun was talking about. And a final comment would be, GEDI was not the first satellite LiDAR, and it won't be the last. Continuing these measurements into the future is important because we are proposing a new mission to follow on from GEDI, and you can find more details of the link. We've had to significantly change the science story given recent developments in the US. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. My colleagues on this work are Salit Kark and the student we co-supervise, Rachel Cooper from the University of Queensland. So I'll be presenting about light pollution and night light, so something a bit different. And here we can see, we are now located here, okay, on South Bank. So that's Brisbane at nighttime, and the University of Queensland is over here. So light pollution is a new anthropogenic stressor that emerged in the 20th century with multiple impacts, socioeconomic, ecological, epidemiological on our own health. So it's something important we need to quantify. And one of the challenges in measuring light pollution is that artificial light at night is emitted from multiple sources in different directions. So what we measure from space differs from what we measure from the ground. So we can use either satellites, drones, all sky cameras, I'll show you examples, or some other photometers, static, mobile, to measure light in different directions from different heights and locations. There are now several satellites available from space that are sensitive enough to measure light at night. I will show some examples from VIRS and the Chinese Sustainable Development Goals satellite. But I will more focus on the value of ground-based measurements of night lights. So if we examine changes in night lights in Moreton Bay, which will be our case study in this presentation, we can see an increase in nighttime brightness as measured by the VIRS over time. You can see this increase in around the port of Brisbane, okay? So, and we can also expect night lights, the light pollution to increase towards, in the future, towards the Olympics and beyond, the 2032 Olympics. And this is a global trend of an increase in light pollution because it is cheaper and easier for us to light the world more, especially with transition to LED lights. The limitations of VIRS, however, are its core spatial resolution, like more than 0.5 kilometer. It doesn't cover the blue region, so it's not useful. It doesn't give us color information, which is very important because our world is, of course, with colors. So what we aim to do in this case study is to quantify the exposure to light pollution in coastal areas, which are an important habitat for migrating birds and other species, and to see which sites were most exposed to light pollution. So our objectives were to examine the difference, first of all, between the island sites and mainland Brisbane area, compare the differences between landward horizon and seaward horizon. I'll explain why that is important, and also to show the added value of ground measurements to those available from space. And with light pollution, we can say that there are two basic components. We have the overall sky glow, which you can see in this hazy white, okay? This is from the Atlas of Sky Brightness of light pollution. And this is doesn't change very quickly. However, in the background, we can see the Chinese satellite image of nighttime brightness. So this more corresponds to the sources of light, okay? So we have two different types of ways to look at light, or even some more. And in red, you can see all our ground measurement sites. And Moreton Bay is quite a complex area because some of the coastal sites are, facing the Pacific Ocean, so there's no sources of light. Some of them, even on the islands, are facing the mainland. Okay, so they are exposed to light pollution from Brisbane. Okay, so the orientation of different coastal sites is very different. This, of course, impacts what we can see, what species are exposed to. And when we just look at the satellite image from space, we don't know what species will be exposed to horizontally, okay? Because the satellite mainly measures the light which is going upwards, okay, reflected or emitted, etc. Here we can see again, all the sites, and this is just a binary presentation of the lit areas from that satellite. And some of the sites, they were all coastal sites. Again, all the measurements are done at night, of course, when we need to check when it's low tides, and we want to have no clouds and no moon, so it's quite tricky. And in some places, this is walking to King Island at low tide. So walking to King Island at nighttime, taking measurements at different locations, and also some other sites on the islands in Moreton Bay. And here you can see Rachel. So we used a calibrated Canon DSLR camera with a fisheye lens. So it captures the whole hemisphere around us, okay? And then we can, because it is a calibrated camera, we can quantify the sky brightness and color. I'll show you this soon. And these are the other sources of nighttime lights that we use from space. Okay. So some examples of some of these images. So on the left, you can see two of the darker sites. And on the right, you can see the calibrated images in the units of magnitude, which are common within the astronomical community. So higher magnitude means darker, okay? So it's a bit contrary to what we usually are thinking about. And you can see that in some places we have trees which are obstructing light sources from the land side, okay? And in other places, you know, there's too much light coming from the land side, going through the trees. And you can also see that, for example, here, so this will be the land side, but we also have light from the horizon, okay? So from some mainland side, okay? So over the bay. So this is the kind of data that we use, and we can then calculate the brightness just, you know, above us, near the zenith, or just different sectors, so above the horizon, what maybe, for example, sea turtles are exposed to. So we can distinguish between horizontal light or the light above us. So first of all, looking at the difference between island and mainland sites, and remember, higher values is darker, okay? So the island sites, as expected, this is just the zenith around above us. Island sites are darker than the mainland sites, that's trivial. And we can use, this is the percent lit pixel within 5 kilometers around a site. So we can use the satellite measurements of nighttime brightness to estimate the sky brightness above us. And, but this doesn't give us information about which side is brighter, okay? If we're looking towards the horizon in the seaward or the landward. So for each image, we, based on the orientation of the coast, we separate it into land side and seaside. In naturally dark areas, the land side is supposed to be quite dark, okay, because there are no sources of light, whereas the seaside is supposed to be brighter because of reflection of light from the stars and the moon from the sea surface. And that's how, for example, sea turtle hatchlings know where to run to, okay, when they hatch from the eggs. So let's look, and we only examined between 10, 30 degrees above the horizon because that's the, let's say, the cone of view of the sea turtles, and just an example of species. So the gray box plots are what we see above us, and the colored ones are just above the horizon. Usually above the horizon it is bright also daytime because of atmospheric scattering, but also because of light sources, okay, from cities, etc. You can see, for example, in the mainland, that the seaworld is brighter than the landward, but both values are very bright. Okay, these are not natural sites. So maybe, I mean, there are no sea turtles hatchling within Moreton Bay, but they would know where to go to because still maybe the sea is brighter than the land, but it's not because it is natural. So the complexity of the geography of this bay is also challenging compared to other geographies of coastline that may be more straight. Another way to collect nighttime brightness using ground measurement is using this light at night cube. So this is a photometer. It's by Martin from Sherbrooke. So he designed this. So this measures the brightness above us, forward, backward, right, left, RGB, GPS. You put it on the roof of the car, you drive around, and every half a second you have measurements. This is an example from Point Lookout, which is a town on North Stradbroke Island. So these are measurements upwards looking, okay? So this represents the street lights, and these are to the right and left, okay? So this also represents, you know, windows and commercial towns or commercial places, etc. At the bottom, you can see in the background the SDG-SAT image, and point lookout is, there are streetlights. These are the locations of the streetlights based on the official data set. However, the streetlights are quite sparse, and mostly this town is quite dimly lit, so it is below the threshold of this satellite. So we don't know from the satellite, how much light there actually is. So these ground mobile measurements are critical to know, okay, what are the sources of light, okay? Because from the satellite, we don't know that. And from the VIRS, we only have here maybe 3 pixels or 4 pixels covering this entire township. So some recommendations, and here I will be happy to talk with Tern, maybe of extending Tern to also monitor light pollution in Australia. So we don't only monitor what's in the daytime, but also nighttime. So it's also half of the story. So first of all, set up a network of photometers. There are different types of photometers that can be used for that. So continuous measurements upwards every minute, for example. Another thing, to acquire hemispheric nighttime images with a digital camera in sensitive locations on an annual basis, so we can compare changes across time and conduct mobile measurements, again, in coastal routes or wherever I think it's relevant. Recommendations for light pollution mitigation. So first of all, identify, in this case, okay, sensitive coastal habitats, identify the sources of light pollution, okay, surrounding these habitats using ground measurements. If possible, modify lighting types to reduce light spill, preferably using warm colors, so the 2200 color temperatures. Consider turning off or dimming streetlights after midnight in collaboration with local communities. This is done in hundreds of villages in France, okay, in recent years. And we also need to act beyond the local scale, because it doesn't help if I reduce lights, in my street, the town next by also affects light pollution. So we thank the Kondamuka Aboriginal Corporation for giving us the permission to conduct work on Kondamuka country, and the volunteers that helped doing the measurements at nighttime. Okay, thank you.
Hi again. What I wanted to cover off on this morning quickly is a little bit of work I've been doing with pulling together all the different aspects of Tern, created a bit of a working group to look at where Tern's strengths are and the key offerings we can do for cal-val. So it's largely a science-free presentation, so you have to excuse me, no graphs, not a single graph. But we got together about a year ago and all put our heads together and worked on what are Tern's real strengths in cal-val space. And one of the things we got to really quickly was our strengths we are much stronger in the validation side of things than the calibration side of things. Calibration generally requires really expensive equipment, requires a specialised skill set to do a great job of that. And yet validation can lean into some of the things we do as standard business anyway. So it can leverage off of our field programs and the fact that we get out and monitor these sites across all of Australia, which is my next point. So our network already encompasses all of Australia's terrestrial ecosystems. So when you're trying to validate products, you don't want to bias to a particular environment. We want examples across all of Australia's key environments. And so we've got a pre-prepared network that does just that. We collect at a huge range of scales. So there's parts of Tern that focus on that national, continental scale, Earth Obs work. We have regional work. We now have a UAV program. The dronescape's been mentioned many times, and we're really excited about the increased information that provides into our network. But also we've got some really skilled people literally at the moment out there collecting field information for us and get down to really specific information as well at the scale of the individual. And so we're able to provide information right through that through that sort of scale area. And we're animated here. So we've got scale, we've got plots right across, so it's covering all of Australia spatially, as well as not just the different environments, we've got all the different climates and plots right across the continent. This is the surveillance network you're all aware of, run this program for some time. But there's aspects of this that we designed back in 2010, 2011 when we were designing it, specifically to make the data more useful for Earth obs. One of the things I think we haven't done an awesome job at is articulating how you can get that to become useful for Earth obs. So perhaps its utility's a little bit hidden, and it's one of the things the working group's really keen to work on over the next year or so, is to make it much more obvious to the EO community just exactly how you can use that data, and perhaps summarise it in new and different ways that are more appealing to that community. Its continental scale in a standardised way is really key. So we collect all our data on a tablet in the field, or the vast majority of our data on a tablet in the field. So you have this sort of, it's almost like a chain of custody issue. You have really accurate data that you can tie back to an actual sample, a specimen, you know with 100% certainty what species you're looking at, all that kind of information. And as we set this up, we focused on making the network as objective as possible. So ecologists historically have gone out and used categoricals quite commonly to assess the proportion of vegetation cover, etc. But it's not quite so useful for Earth obs. So we've focused on actually creating methods where we were measuring things and we could accurately quantify them. You'll note our plot in the bottom left there. Is at a scale that's ideal for mid and high resolution imagery. It's orientated north, south, east, west, makes it easier to use for validation purposes. And right from the outset, from 15 years ago when it was somewhat clunkier than it is today to do, very accurately located, so all those points we know to a few tens of centimetres exactly where they occur. That standardisation, probably preaching the converted here, but that standardisation hasn't always been a standard thing, if that didn't sound too silly. So each of Australia's states and territories have historically collected this information in a way that's optimised for their environment, but it makes the process, and many of you will have done this, makes the process of pulling that together at the national scale quite problematic. It's a massive data issue to occur before you can use it at that scale. So by setting out standards and collecting it in the same way across the continent, we've made that easier. And you can see examples of Tern standards there. So that's one of our real strengths in cal-val space. I kind of feel like I'm summarising everyone else's presentations, really. So this is JC and the team's hard work. So we're really excited with Dronescape's ability to feed into this information. I think what it does is it gives us, as an ecologist, putting my ecologist hat back on, it really gives me the advantage of being able to get information at plots much more frequently than I can get a field team out there to do. But it's information that's in a way that makes it much easier to scale up to Earth obs, etc. as well. And in some of the data streams probably collect, particularly in structural information in a way and at an accuracy my field teams can't collect as well. So we think it's adding a really significant extra piece of information into our network that's going to be really, really valuable in future. Of course, there's far more qualified people than me to chat to about it. If you can. It's lovely to see that become operational, and JC had an updated slide. I'll get a sledging for using an outdated slide later. But it's really nice that that's become really quite quickly truly operational. I think we leveraged a lot of the learning from early parts of AusPlots. But this program started the middle of last year and is now routinely on a 2-week on, 2-week off basis going out there and collecting 29 plots in the last 10 days, for example. I had a check-in while we were at the museum from my UAV team, really excited that they'd got their 29 plots on schedule and everything was working really nicely. We very quickly got to where more powerful working together. So all the scales of Tern mean that we've all the types of work we do come together and become really really more powerful when they're utilised together. And by doing that and collaborating, we achieve a whole lot more than worrying about competition, etc. So it's real focus on what we do. And Laura and the team have done an awesome job of, many of you mentioned GEO-TREES already. I'm not going to discuss it again, but we're starting to see this as collecting GEO-TREES information is a nice way to leverage what we already collect. We already collect a lot of really good plot information. We've got UAV programs, etc. We start to bring them all together in the one place at the one time. We're not far off of what GEO-TREES needs anyway. So with a little coordination, we're starting to get those plots up to the standard, the number of plots, etc., in the one place at the one time. And really excited to be leading a group of people to make this happen out at the Great Western Woodlands in a couple of months' time. And the last thing's just to talk about EMSA for a minute or so. Sal will present on this later. This is where we make a whole lot of our field information available, those methods available publicly. And so there's field methods there already that would be useful for validation purposes if anyone wants to do this. So we not only are we doing it, we're enabling others to do it in a standardised way. And over time, I'd anticipate certainly we've got the process underway to get some of our UAV data into this system as well. And so hopefully, fast forward 5 or 10 years down the track, it won't just be Tern doing this, but we'll be doing some of it strategically, but also coordinating others to do it in a standardised way. That's it from me. Thank you.
So I'll follow behind Ben then and move into some carbon-dense forests. I'll talk about Robson Creek, which is in my part of the world in the wet tropics. I'll make lots of shout-outs to people that have already presented as we go through, and you can see there we've got the Tern director in the field at Robson Creek in a recent calibration validation exercise. So a lot of people involved. Shaun's in the audience. Kim's been mentioned in several talks already. So Robson Creek then sitting in that part of Queensland is exposed to lots of rainfall on the coast. So we've got wet tropical rainforests, which clearly aren't a major vegetation type in Australia, but there's a lot of biodiversity that's present, including strange things like tree kangaroos. The forests in this part of the world are being exposed to quite a different climatic regime. There's a lot of species that are already being pushed to the edge. So there's a big focus on understanding what's going on in these sort of interesting forests to work in. So you've seen several slides of Robson already, Guru's background. He was using a view from above for a UAV of the site. So Tau went in a number of years ago then. It's one of the ecosystem processes sites. So Ben was talking about surveillance ecosystem processes. Was started from the fusion of Tern Ausflux, which involved fluxes, and Tern supersites that I set up, and EP is the resultant. So I'm going to do a brief shout out to a new site that I've set up, which is in Fletcherview Station, which is in Savannah, Western Woody Savannah managed system. And this one then is my gold standard flux site. So these things always have got flux towers in them, which is a key thing. And so Ben's got plots sitting at Fletcherview because it's a rangeland system, whereas Robson's quite different. It's carbon dense, it's got lots of structural complexity, it's got lots of species of trees. You can see there 270 species inside the core plot. Okay, that's 1 hectare plot. Lots of stems, and so it's a significant exercise to measure in these forests. So the tower then has got protection from ferals of various sorts. You'll see razor wire there to prevent ferals climbing up into the tower. The core plot number 6 is indicated in the digital elevation model. It's got some terrain, but it's not too bad by the standards of wet tropics. So a long-term flux data set then is a key part of what we collect. Now, Robson Creek was established because CSIRO had a long-term monitoring plot there, and so they wanted to put in a 25-hectare census plot. So I'm now the permit holder for these long-term plots. We've got a network that's been set up by a group of us to keep these plots going because the key is long-term data sets and linking to modern technology. So we've seen quite a bit already on GEO-TREES. Here's just a shout out to Forest Geo. You saw Stuart Davies' name before. So Forest Geo then set up a number of these large plots, 25 or 50 hectare plots some years ago. BCI is the first one. It's a tropical forest plot network. We haven't managed to get Robson into the system yet fully because in the 25 hectare there might be 23,000 stems greater than 10 centimetres DBH, but they want us to go down to 1 or 2 centimetres DBH, and the amount that costs in Australia is absolutely insane. Carbon dense here indicates around 400 tonne per hectare. So the GEO-TREES exercise has been carried out at Robson Creek then recently. So the TLS scans have been done, the recensus inside the 25 hectare have done. So we've only done one full census of the 25 hectare, but we've now recensused 10 hectares to meet the GEO-TREES requirements. The Airborne ALS work has been done, and Shaun's coming back to do some more again next month. But in addition, we linked it to a commercial activity that was going on. So Silvera are a company then based in Europe who were wanting to use these sites, those long-term plots, the plots at Robson Creek, to calibrate and validate their products that they produce. So they're a company then that validates carbon credits. So to do this, then they had a large airborne mission, and they coupled that into extension of some of the measurements in the plots, those CSIRO old plots. Here we've got some TLS work happening as part of that exercise for Kim's crew that were in there. As usual, we're using allometric equations to calculate biomass. This is some UAV data, and the key is that these sorts of very carbon-dense forests, they're right at the pointy end of trying to do ALS work to get enough hits on the ground. It's quite challenging. So over the years then, Kim and Shaun have been using Robson quite extensively. So the Silvera people then took a helicopter and they scanned a much larger area, so 57,000 hectares then. So we've gone then from a small-scale UAV exercise to then embedding that into a much larger regional scale scanning exercise. And the nice thing is that these are young scientists that are part of that company. They then are providing the data back to Tern. And so as long as other commercial companies are not using the data, we're quite happy that science people can use the data. Now we're linking into Darius's effort. You'll see yesterday that at one of the EP sites in Western Australia, that one of these leaf scanners was being used at Boyajan. In Caitlin's talk. Here we've got a leaf scanner in at Robson Creek. I was talking to Darius just before. There's a leaf scanner going to Robson Creek, and this is to give the very high density time series data that's required that links to the stuff that John was talking to before as well. So we get PAI out of this, but now at a daily scale. Here's some use of phenocam data. So here I worked with some colleagues. We were trying to link the data that's obtained by very high resolution satellites, so PlanetScope satellite data, through to deciduous character across tropical forests. So there are some deciduous and hemideciduous species in these forests. and having these sort of sites, these reference sites around the globe that you can rely on to provide data, through Tern in this case, was quite pivotal in this sort of exercise. The other thing that I haven't actually probably got a graphic on here as well is that at these sites as well, we've got the water side of the equation being studied as well. So at Fletcherview, we've got a Cosmos sensor. At Robson Creek, we've got a Cosmos sensor. So that stuff that we talked about yesterday is also part of the mixture. So these things are linking water, they're linking carbon very effectively. So back to fluxes. So where the site started then was to provide a flux tower in a reasonably good location. I was running 3 towers at the start, the other 2 in really bad locations for flux towers, very hilly terrain. This is a relatively dry site at 2 metres of rain. The other sites were at 4 metres and 3 metres. So this site then, we put it into a number of tropical sites around the globe. This was the only site in the tropical rainforests of the world where there are flux towers that will survive into a future climate. So it's in a thermally buffered sort of region naturally. So it's a very important long-term flux site, as well as all of these other things that it enables. And I think that's a key part for Tern EP, because we've got technicians who are electronically capable on site. We're able to back up lots of missions. We've got towers that people can work from and things like that. So a big shout out to Tern for enabling these sort of exercises. Some key people, and as usual, without a good botanist, and these are our 2 botanists in the middle. So one of them now is on contract to me, that's Andrew, and the other guy now works in a pub. Thank you.
Wow, what a session. So we've got time for questions and answers. I'd invite the speakers to come up. The seats are just ornaments, so don't bother sitting down because there's not enough. So please stay standing and we'll ask a few questions. I have to say things have changed a lot. When I first started, we went to Dick Smith and bought a remote control airplane and put an SLR camera in it and took some photos of canopods in the rangelands to estimate cover. And look where we are today with drones and everything else. So, some questions from the internet. This one's, we'll go from the start. Wow, Laura. GEO-TREES is obviously a long-term project. Should funding discontinue? I don't know where it's going. Is there a plan for securing data, knowledge of collaborators and products developed by the project? So if something changes, is all the data going to be safe somewhere?
Ooh, okay, good question. Yeah, so it's a work in progress. There's a lot of moving parts, right? So at this point, the funding has been secured to essentially do a first crack at, I'd say probably about 75 sites for one period. And so we are, the bulk of the funding is from these philanthropic wings of commercial companies from like the Baseless Earth Fund. So we are hopeful and optimistic, but it is not like something that is for sure secured. So we're just going to keep doing the work, showing that what you can do with the original GEO-TREES data, building these EO validation tools, et cetera. And I'm optimistic that because there is such a return on investment from, a lot of this is going into the carbon market, that we'll be able to convince those funders to continue that. But it isn't guaranteed. The data will be safe though, because the GEO-TREES data is going to be stored not just at NASA, but NASA and ESA servers. So it's not just archived in one place, it's all going to be in the cloud, open access. So the data will continue to be stored and open, it won't disappear. The long-term sustainable funding, it's going to be, we'll just see how it goes as we continue.
Thank you. Jack, is there a plan to develop products for decision makers from the information you provided and the estimation of plant stress?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We do have initiated some initial discussion with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industry and also the few innovation farm hub, some kind of the capability that help farmers to prepare and then forecast and guide the decision making of the drought. So definitely the important aspect of all those Earth observation application is to enable transition from science to practice and operations to really provide a product and service to people in need. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Adriana, what challenges exist in your work if resources such as NVIS are not kept up to date? So, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, yeah, and the NBIS classification was fundamental for starting this work. Although we do have plans to move to the global ecosystem typology at some point because that's part of the global biodiversity framework. But the description of the ecosystems in NBIS is so detailed, so it's a very essential tool. I don't know what's the prospect for the continuation of this product, but I think it's a really good tool, and I really hope it can continue into the future because it was very fundamental for this study.
You use fire as your example. It's just a disturbance. Is your tool applicable to other disturbances like cyclone damage or clearing or land use change?
Unfortunately, no. So for this specific model, we only focus on fire disturbance. We evaluated all other change detection techniques, but since for this specific region, that was the main driver, that's what we focus on. But yeah, it would be great to evaluate that with other agencies if they're interested in it.
So Norm, question here is around, do you know how the changing levels of night are being used by researchers for understanding what other things than just vertebrates? So are there impacts on photosynthesis, insects, other things?
There are many impacts on different species. Sea turtles have been one of the most researched ones, but there are also impacts on ourselves, on sleeping patterns, on the impacts on certain cancer types, and it's also nightlights are used as a proxy for a human stressor on ecosystems, like in the human footprint mapping or and such.
Okay, moving on. So Shaun, you talked about remeasure. If 10 years is too long, how do we decide on what's optimal, cost-effective sort of period between remeasures? Is it after extreme events? You know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it also varies by the ecosystem type. A lot of the Tern sites cover a broad range, and some systems are just more dynamic than others, but often there's changes that if we're not measuring, we don't know what's happened or what hasn't. So I think as a rule of thumb, 5 years would be better than 10, but ideally about 3 years would be about the sweet spot, I think. There's also a mix, you know, there's the system I was showing, but then there's also the practicalities, and I think the DroneScape approach is more scalable. So there might be some cases where we're having that type of data collected on a more frequent basis, and then other types of data at the 3 to 5 year time frame.
You showed the examples of trees and forest. Have you looked at if your work in shrublands in the more arid zones?
Yes, we've done quite a lot of work at the Culperum site and the Mallee, and we'll be out at Great Western Woodlands, and Alice Mulga will be on our list too. They are complex systems, but this type of remote sensing is very well suited to those sparse canopies, so the detection of the ground and the branches and that works very well in the dry environments.
Because I'm here, I'll ask one more. What about deadwood in arid zones? Can you delineate that from live and living plants? And the question is, deadwood can stand in the rangelands for a long time, and it could be ecologically important.
Yes, we're able to segment the deadwood very well. We need time series data to know if it stays dead or if it's just leafless at the time. So that's the challenge.
Simulating death.
Yeah.
Krish, in time, can you see long-term greenness product being used to map trends, for example, in invasive species?
So for invasive species, I think we need an integration between field data that contains these species abundances and the greening maps we have. Because the greening maps alone only tells you about the growth of vegetation, but it doesn't incorporate any shifts in species. So like you could get an increase of like invasive species, but it won't be reflected in the greening map itself.
So, Mike, another question here is, in your presentation, you've shown that we're really innovative. We've got some really good tech. So, how should we communicate more on, some of the measurement and sensor innovations that we enable? For example, TLS in high STEM area like at Robson, or some other examples.
So I've got another site that we run at Cow Bay, and Cow Bay is actually a tourist centre in the Daintree, and it's got a tower in it, and I've put a mast on top of the tower, and we actually communicate. There's a plot that's actually part of the tourist centre, and we get a lot of the Tern information back to the tourists that come through and sell what we're up to. So I think there are some of the other sites as well that have got that sort of ability to provide some live streams of data to indicate the sorts of products they're producing. So in addition to publications, I think that's sort of public outreach. Fletcher View, that's got involvement of DPI, Queensland, and we've got farmers come to site and they start to understand how this tech actually plays out to help them in monitoring what's going on their properties as well.
Mm. Excellent. And yeah, for us, we've shared the dashboard with the farmer where we've got a flux tower, and that's been a game changer because you can just look at it and go,
Yeah.
I understand what's going on now.
Yeah.
So we've got 1 minute, so probably the last question before lunch. So this one's directed for you, Ben. So in additional to the integration of monitoring activities, what challenges are there for data services that are needed as the front window for cal-val?
Yeah, I think a couple of issues there. The first's making the types of data we've got aware. So I think there's a lot of data we've got that's really useful for cal-val. That's not why it's useful and how it's useful for cal-val is not immediately obvious. So I think we can do a better job there. And then putting that data in the place where Earth Ob scientists will find it, I think is the second part of that issue.
Mm-hmm. And because you've given us such a good, short, succinct answer, we actually have time for one for John. And so everyone gets a question. So given the value of long-term monitoring, John, data security for historic data sets seems urgent. So what are the hurdles here in doing that? Is it financial, social, technical, political, other? What do you see as the barrier?
Oh, I mean, there's probably a few facets to the answer to that question. I mean, a lot of the recent data sets, like the Indian data set I've talked about, the funding that was provided for the last 2 visits sort of mandated that the data's open access, and we'll publish that accordingly, and with all the associated standards needed to ensure access to that data long term. The older data is actually, there are some ensuring the security of that data from interpreting that right. There's been some challenges because often we're trying to contact scientists who work in the field, like accessing, an example would be accessing the field data from 2009 was a long process, and so it takes dedicated effort and time to collect that data, attribute it appropriately, and assemble all the required metadata and publish it through services like Tern. And so that's probably a time and financial resource barrier to achieving that, but it's really important at these long-term monitoring sites because we need to maintain the integrity of these core measurements over time, and the metadata is part of that.
Thank you. And with that, we'll draw the session to a close. Just a few housekeeping before we thank speakers. So we have posters out in the lunch area, so please go and have a read of the posters. The people with posters will be around.
They're actually going to give 3-minute pictures at what time? It's on the program.
They're going to give 3-minute pictures at their posters. There we go, I'm being kicked off. Beryl.
Sorry. I just want to make sure, we have some wonderful posters and they're really important. Sorry, guys. So we've allowed time for lunch, but at 1:20, it would be really good if you could gather in the poster area where our Education and Training Manager, Dr. Eleanor Velasquez, will chair the people who've got posters giving 3-minute pictures. You can have your lunch in your hand and eat and drink and stuff like that, but it would be great to give that time before you come back in for the afternoon session at 5 to 2. Thank you.
Excellent. That's my housekeeping role taken care of. But let's thank the speakers for a great session. Thank you, everyone.